It's just so weird spending a lot of time without speaking in English and then going back to it, because it's like my mouth kind of forgets how to form the words. Well, hello there. It's been a while, but before we get into the actual May wrap up, I would just like to say a few things and to make a few things abundantly clear. And the first of them is, of course, Black Lives Matter. I 100% support the Black Lives Matter movement and any anti-racist movement for that matter. And if you don't do the same, then this is the moment when I politely ask you to get the fuck out of here. You are not welcome in this channel, and I don't want to associate with you, and I don't want to be associated with you. So, fuck off. I don't think my voice is the one that needs to be heard right now. I am a white person. I am Latina, but, you know, I live in Brazil, and here I am a white person. So, I live with all the privileges that come with being a white person. And at the end of the day, the voices that we should be listening to when we're talking about racism and things like that are the voices of the people who actually go through that, in this case Black people. And that's why I will leave links down below in both the description and the pinned comment for videos from Black creators. These are all Black creators whose works I've been following and that I really like, and I strongly encourage you to watch their videos as well. I'm also going to leave a link to a master list of resources. There are petitions, there are, you know, links to donations and to educational resources and to art by Black people and businesses by Black people. So it's a very good list. It's a very complete list, and I'm going to leave this link down in the description and in the pinned comment as well. And I'm also going to leave links to a couple of petitions regarding two Black Brazilian people who were murdered by police in Brazil as well, because those haven't been getting a lot of attention. I really hope that you take the time to sign both these petitions. It takes less than a minute, so please do it. And I would also like to take this moment to make it clear that being an ally is not supposed to be comfortable for us, and it's not supposed to make us happy. It's not supposed to be something to only put our consciousness at ease. We don't get to sit around and wait for Black people to just digest the whole information and educate us. You know, that's not their duty. They already have a lot going on in their plates, and being an ally means getting the fucking work done. If you have any question regarding specific things, you can Google it. Google is free. And I assure you that whatever question you have, if you Google it, there's gonna be at least, at the very least, a dozen of articles and videos by Black people answering the same question. Black people never hid the struggles. You know, they have always shared the struggles and the oppression they go through, and they've always been very vocal about it. We just haven't been listening. We only listen when it's convenient to us, and we have to do better. Being an ally is not like a class you take where you read a couple of books and you take this test and you pass it with flying colors and never have to worry about it again. That's not how it works. Okay, this is a daily thing. This is a daily process, a constant process. And we have to always be trying to get better and to read more and to educate ourselves more and to listen to Black people, okay? Being called out if you say something racist, it's not a personal offense to you. You listen to that and you do better. And when I say reading to educate ourselves, I mean reading non-fiction, because if you only interact with all of these very relevant and important topics in fiction, it will always seem like a far-off thing to you. It will always seem like fiction and like a distant reality when these things are going on every single day. There is nothing wrong if you found out about a certain topic through fiction, but you cannot get your whole education and all the information on that from fiction. You have to do more. And of course, the bare minimum, call out people in your real life on the racist bullshit, make them uncomfortable, and, you know, just, it's very easy to be an ally if it's only going to be the theoretical stuff, you know, the reading and the talking about it on Twitter and all that. It's when it gets down to you being an ally in real life and making all of the theory into practice, that's when it gets hard. And that's one of the most important parts. So, and the last thing I want to say, before we get into the wrap up, is to my fellow non-Americans, please do your research on what racism looks like and what the history of racism is in your own countries. It is a disservice to pretend that this only goes on in America, or that the racism in your country is going to work in the same way as it does in America. Read articles and books and theses by people, black people from your country or who live in your country, about the racism that happens in your country. And to any Americans who might be watching this, I would also highly encourage you to try to learn more about the struggles of black people in other countries. Because again, this is not something that only happens in America, and Black Lives Matter everywhere, okay? Not only in our own countries, but in the whole world. And yeah, that's all I want to say on that. Okay, so now we get into the wrap up. So May, as you were probably aware, was Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and Cindy from Rebirth Cindy hosted once again the Asian Readathon. I believe this was the second year the Readathon happened, and I decided to take part in it. There were 4 main prompts and 1 additional one. The main ones were: read a book written by an Asian author, read a book with an Asian character or written by an Asian author who you can relate to, read a book with an Asian character or written by an Asian author who is different from you, and read a book that was recommended to you by an Asian person. And the additional prompt was to read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. I decided to pick up books that could fit into all 4 prompts, if that makes sense. Like, every single book that I picked could work for any of the 4 main prompts. Does that make sense? And I'm going to go through all of the books in the order that I've read them. The first book I read was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. This takes place in Shaker Heights, which is like a suburban area of Cleveland, where everything is planned. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Like the height of the houses, the model of the houses, the colors you can paint your house, what types of plants you can plant in your front yard. Everything is planned. And we mostly follow these 2 families, the Warrens and the Richardsons. Mia and Paul Warren are mother and daughter, respectively, and they just recently moved into Shaker Heights, and they rented a house that belongs to the Richardsons. The Richardsons are a family of mother, father, and 4 children. Mia is a single mother, and she's also an artist, but she takes jobs on the side as well in order to provide for her and her daughter Pearl. And she has a complete disregard for the status quo, while Lena Richardson is your typical suburban mom. She really appreciates order and practicality. And soon enough, these 2 families become intertwined because the kids from each family become quite drawn to each other. Then a couple of old friends from the Richardsons attempt to adopt this Chinese-American baby, and a crazy custody battle ensues that basically divides the entire town and puts Mia and Alina on opposing sides. I loved this book. It was such an interesting and nuanced read, and Celeste does such a great job at delving into these different characters' minds and explaining their thought processes and why they made certain decisions without necessarily justifying any of it. And she really delves into very complex issues without taking a firm stance, so she makes everyone make sense regardless of whether or not they're right or wrong. And all of the characters are very sympathetic. Although not all of them are great people, all of them are quite sympathetic and all of them make sense. I thought it was very interesting how I ended up relating to different characters in different ways, even characters that I didn't like as people. And I also really love books about white suburban neighborhoods that look so perfect on the surface, but when you take a closer look, you see just how rotten they are underneath it all. I love to see all the dirt that's beneath that carefully constructed surface. There are many discussions in this book regarding different important topics, all very relevant topics, but the one about the custody battle, I believe, is the main one. And it's so interesting. It's such an interesting discussion because, what is best for the child, Is it living with the adoptive parents who can offer her comfort and opportunities that she wouldn't have otherwise? Or is it living with the birth mother and having contact with her Chinese heritage? Her birth mother doesn't have money and her adoptive parents lack any understanding of what being an Asian person means. Everyone has good intentions, but at the end of the day, does that even matter, you know? And this book explores all of that very well, and it gives points to each side, you know? It talks about both the pros and the cons of both sides of the conflict, which is amazing. One minor thing too that I highly appreciated about this book was the portrayal of Mira as an artist. I am an artist as well. I am an actress and I am a film student and I work with analog photography. I've been working with it for almost 2 years now, and it was very interesting, and I really loved reading about Mia's work and just her passion for her work and all of the processes to get to the final product, and also her history with analog photography. And of course, there's the portrayal of the struggle of only being considered an artist and only having your art seen as an actual job if you are financially successful from it and if you work exclusively with it, you know, which is a very real thing. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars because I did think that the ending was quite rushed. You know, I think things ended up being solved a bit too fast for my taste. After reading Little Fires Everywhere, I got dragged into this massive reading slump, and I actually spent most of the month of May without reading anything until one day I finally decided to pick up The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. And I actually picked this one up because romances are usually very good at getting me in a reading mood. And I was just expecting a fun, you know, quick and easy read. But oh my god, I loved this book. It was so fucking cute. Here we follow Stella, who is a 30-year-old economist, and she has a hard time with like dating and physical intimacy due to her autism spectrum disorder, and so she decides to hire an escort in order to, you know, teach her the ways of romance. And we also follow Michael, who is the escort that Stella ends up hiring, and he is a half Vietnamese, half Swedish guy, and he actually works as an escort in order to try to help support his family. And their relationship starts off as more of a business transaction, if that makes sense, and then slowly evolves into something else. The romance in this book was adorable, and I really liked seeing Michael and Stella getting to know each other and sort of adapting to each other's lives and each other's peculiarities. And I also love them both individually as characters. And although they liked each other as people from the get-go and they were physically attracted to each other from the get-go too, the emotional/relationship aspect of the romance was a very slow burn and very angsty, which I adore. But it was also so wholesome and so cute. I loved how we got to see a lot of Stella's job and how passionate she is about it. And also how, you know, she works in a more traditionally male field, I guess you could say, while Michael works in a more traditionally female field. I'm not talking about escorting, by the way. I'm talking about his actual job, which is kind of a spoiler, so I'm not gonna go into here. And I also loved how we go to meet Michael's family and, you know, their family dynamic and how much they actually cared for each other. That was just, that was so good. And Helen Hoang is actually Vietnamese and autistic, so the rep for both of those is on voices, which is amazing. This book has a lot of sex scenes, so if that's not something that you typically enjoy, maybe don't pick this one up. I loved the smut in this. It was amazing. I loved how consent was always discussed and it was always present. And, you know, Helen Hoang did such a great job at making just the slightest touches and kisses seem so erotic. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars too, because I felt like the angst in the end of this dragged on for a bit too long. I love slow burn and angst in my romances, but it has to feel natural and make sense. And I felt like it didn't really make sense to me for them to still feel insecure about things that kind of seem to have been cleared up already, especially considering how communicative these characters were, you know, about everything else from the beginning. So yeah. And after that, I read Tell Me Again How a Crush Should Feel by Sara Farizan. And I am really conflicted about this book. So this follows Layla, a girl who just recently found out that she's a lesbian, and her family is quite traditional. She's the daughter of a couple of Iranian immigrants, and she already feels like her Persian heritage makes her stick out enough at school, so she doesn't really feel safe coming out in any environment. You know, she doesn't feel safe sharing her sexuality anywhere, and for that reason she is very relieved that she doesn't have a crush on anyone at school until she gets a crush on someone at school. The girl she has a crush on is called Saskia, and she is a half Brazilian, half Dutch, I think, girl who is a new student there. And, you know, suddenly Layla starts taking risks that she never thought she would, and she starts realizing that people around her, her friends and her classmates, are a lot more complex than she initially thought they were. Here's the thing. I had a hard time getting into this book. I found Layla to be an unbearable character. She was just so judgmental, and she had such a superiority complex that it was nearly impossible to keep reading from her perspective in the beginning. She does eventually evolve and, you know, learns from her mistakes and becomes a better person. But, to be honest with you, that did not erase how much I disliked the first half of this book. The writing was also quite juvenile, but I do understand that I am not the target audience for this book. I think if I had read this back when I was 14 or 15, I would have really enjoyed the writing and I would have thought that it was quite relatable. But, you know, reading it as an adult, reading it right now, I just really didn't like it. At the same time, I did appreciate, you know, how we got to see Layla grow and evolve as a character. And there were a few characters that I actually really liked and thought were very well written. And I loved reading about Layla's family and the family dynamics and how they go closer to each other throughout the novel, and also about the traditions. And I just really felt for her, you know, when it came to not feeling comfortable coming out to her family out of fear that they would hate her, because honestly, same. In the end, I do rate books mostly in terms of my enjoyment of them, and I really did not enjoy most of this one. I hated the entire first half, and I did hate a lot of the second half as well. So I ended up giving this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up Solanin by Inio Asano, and this is the Brazilian edition. It's in 2 volumes, volume 1, volume 2. I believe the American edition is just a bind-up of both volumes. I'm gonna leave the cover here. This is a manga that follows a group of 20-somethings basically going through the quarter-life crisis. So it mostly focuses on the inner struggle of needing to grow up and work and pay the bills versus following your dreams and keeping your passions alive and being happy. It talks about loving something and wanting to do it for the rest of your life, while also questioning yourself whether or not you're good enough at it and whether or not being good even matters at all. The art was stunning. It kind of looks like rotoscope. Rotoscope is when you draw on top of a video frame by frame. So kind of like tracing, I guess. I don't know, I just think it looks really beautiful, and I love that we get many shades of grey as well. I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The reason I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 stars was because there was a lot of fat shaming and sexism, and I'm honestly not sure whether or not it was intentional. Like, I don't know whether or not the author is actually aware of those things, you know what I mean? There is this one couple in this that is just the fucking worst. The guy is constantly objectifying and sexualizing other women and hitting on them, and the girl is just very abusive to him and constantly fat shames him, and all of this seems to be played off as a joke. I don't know, it really rubbed me the wrong way. But I did really enjoy the themes, and I really liked the story as well, and most of the other characters. And I really love stories about 20-year-olds having to, get into the real world and how they adapt or not to how the capitalist world works, basically. That was a very specific thing. Okay. We have a slight angle change because I ran out of battery because I'm a dumb bitch. So Mickey, olha você. Você olha. So the last book that I've read for the Asian Readathon was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal, and you guys, I think I might have a new favorite. Like, I'll have to reread it to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that this belongs in my favorite books. This book was inspired by ancient Arabia, and it takes place in the fictional land of Aravia, where magic was banished years ago, and the land is cursed by this thing called the Ars. And the Ars is like this darkness that is creeping closer each passing day and makes whoever comes in contact with it lose their mind. And we follow two main characters, Zafira and Nazir. Zafira here is able to get into the Ars and kind of keep her sanity. So she goes inside the forest that was taken by the Ars every single day in order to hunt and feed her people. But the village that she lives in is quite misogynistic, so she has to dress up, like disguise herself as a man every single day in order to be able to do that. Al-Nazir is an assassin and the son of the Sultan, and he's always kind of like fighting this internal struggle between his compassion and his emotions and what his abusive father makes him do. But the two of them are sent into different quests for the same magical object, and Nazir is actually tasked with killing Zafira. It's just so good. I adored this. I thought the writing was stunning, the world building was super well done, and all of the creatures and the magic and the myths of this world were amazing, and I loved the characters so much, especially the two protagonists. But there's also this character, the side character, that is called Altair, and he is just, I loved him so much. He's kind of like the comic relief, but he also kind of brings this more human side to Nazir, and I love them so much. I especially loved Nazir. He was like my favorite character out of the bunch, easily. And he was just very broody and very tormented, and he was always caught like in this back and forth between what his disgusting abusive father wanted from him and all these monstrous things that he's done in his life, but also all of his feelings and his wanting to be better and his compassion and all that. And I just thought he was fascinating, honestly. I didn't know that some people thought he was too angsty, but I personally, I loved it. I love a tormented hero. He really sees himself as a monster, and we actually get to see him murdering people, which is a change. Most of the times I've read books with characters who are assassins or badasses or monsters and all that. They talked a whole lot about how monstrous they were, but we never actually got to see them doing anything like that. And one of Nazir's first scenes here, he is murdering an innocent person because his father asked him to do so. So he knows that the things he does are wrong, but at the same time he was conditioned from such an early age to think that he has to obey his father, that there's this just in a battle that is so I loved reading about it. I also love the romance in this and how deliciously slow burn it was. Hafsah Faizal also did a great job making like the teeniest, tiniest touches, the slightest touches seem super sensual and erotic, and I am 100% here for it. I also really liked all the different dynamics between the characters and how they interacted with each other. And the female friendships in this were amazing as well. I want to note, though, that objectively speaking, I am aware that the pacing of this book is a bit off, but it didn't bother me personally. Like, most of the middle chunk of the book involved a lot of characters walking from one place to another, like not much happened plot-wise. It was mostly the characters getting to know each other and getting closer to each other, you know, establishing relationships and all that. Didn't bother me. I loved every single second of it because I am, you know, mostly a character over plot girl. I think the only negative part of this experience was the fact that I really thought that the sequel was already out. So I was reading this thinking that I would finish it and be able to get the second book already. Turns out that the sequel only comes out next year. So that was heartbreaking. But anyway, I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I finished reading in the month of May was Into the Drowning Deep by Mira. How do I explain this book? There was this group of people that went to the Mariana Trench to make a mockumentary about mermaids, and all of them disappeared, and they were presumed dead. And then some footage was released showing killer mermaids killing them all. Some people think the footage is real, but most people believe it is a hoax, and the book actually starts 7 years after all of that happens. A second expedition is actually put together to go to that same location to kind of like investigate whether or not the mermaids were real, and in order to bring closure to the families, and of course make a documentary. This was such a fun and thrilling read. It kind of read like a monster movie, like Pacific Rim or The Mag. It was the most fun I've had reading a book in years. We follow a group of characters, most of whom are scientists, as they study this part of the ocean and try to find these creatures, as well as kind of diving into the personal motivations they had to join this journey. And there's a lot of science and also pseudoscience in this, and I honestly couldn't tell what was real and what was made up for the purposes of the story. So there's that. And oh my god, there is so much diversity here. We have a bisexual scientist who actually joined the expedition in order to try to find out what happened to her sister, who was part of the original crew, you know, the one that went missing and are presumed dead. And we also have a lesbian autistic reporter who just wants to use this as a chance to shine in her work. And there's also this scientist who exclusively studies mermaids, and she's fat and Hawaiian, I think is how you say it. But my personal favorite group of characters was this group of 3 sisters, 2 of whom are deaf twins, and the other one, the hearing one, acts as the translator. The hearing one and one of the twins are scientists, and the other deaf twin is a kind of submarine pilot. It was so interesting reading about them. And we also got a few chapters that were from the POVs of sea creatures, which was so fascinating and so interesting to read. There were a few from the perspectives of the mermaids, but there was also a few from the perspectives of other sea creatures, and it was just so weird and so amazing. I do have to say that there is some body horror and gore and blood in this, so if that's not something you like reading about, then I wouldn't suggest picking this up. I had a blast reading this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you feel like it, and as always, I'll see you around.